Another example of a pretest loop is the for each. Now the for each is very, very simple to use. The use case for this is that you're going to iterate through some type of collection, and you don't have to have a condition anymore, such as a for loop. This will just iterate through the whole collection until it sees that it went through every element in the collection. Once it goes through the whole collection, it's going to come out of this loop. There's no condition for you to check if it's true or false to state in the loop. So think about it this way: you're forced to go through the collection one by one. You're forced to go through the collection one by one. Again, pre-test loop, because your collection might be empty. So if your collection is empty, then you're not necessarily going to enter the body of the loop. Same deal with the compound statements. You can put any PowerShell statements within here, and the logic is going to say, okay, for every item that's in our collection, we're going to do one iteration per item in the collection. Let me show you a more precise example. And now we're getting into the concept of going through a collection, which in general is a data structure. And we'll cover this more detail once we get these loops out of the way. So let's take a look at the syntax. So let's say I have something like, we'll call this letter array, and we're going to have capital A, capital B, capital C, and capital D. Now what I've done there is I've declared a collection of strings. This is going to be the collection that I'm going to iterate through using my for each syntax. So if I do for each, now I need a variable that will represent each item in this collection. And I can name that whatever I want. I can say single letter in my letter array collection. So what this is doing is it's saying, okay, I'm going to represent each letter in my letter array collection. And then as we iterate, my single letter for that iteration is going to hold that specific element of the collection. So what I can do is, just for testing purposes, I can say write host single letter. So if we do that, it writes out A, comes back up, writes out B, comes back up, writes down C, comes back up, and then writes down D. Notice I didn't have to do any type of conditions. I can just go through, it's going to go through every element in that collection. The for each is really powerful. It's actually a little more powerful than just the normal loop, because we can also use commandlets within our for each. So the get child item, if I run that commandlet, it's going to give me a collection of files in my directory. Now, what I can do is I can represent each object in my for each and iterate through each object in that file list for get child item. So if I run this, you'll see that it lists every individual file name. Remember when we look back to our initial lessons, this gives us back a collection of objects, meaning that for each file object in this collection, now we have a specific object which we now have different properties available to us. So we can access these accordingly. if we want, and we can also access its methods, right? Remember, it has members, and in these members it's going to have methods, properties, and so on. And what I can do is to add to this, let's say I want to put some type of if condition. So we can say that if file object dot length is greater than, let's do 100 kilobytes, we're going to write the name of the file. Okay, so let's do that. So now that I have my object in my iteration, now I can do some type of PowerShell statements to compare the length or the size. So these are all the files that are over 100 kilobytes. Let's look at the files that are less than 100 kilobytes. Let's do that. Okay, so this is good. Okay, this is good. So all these files are less than 100 kilobytes. Now, this will do get child item in your working directory of where you're currently at. So just remember that. I just want to make sure that when you do call this commandlet, you're going to do it for the current working directory that you're in. So let's do a little bit of a challenge here. What I want to do is I want to get the count of files that are greater than 100 kilobytes. Maybe you have some type of need, or you've had some type of need in the past where you just wanted to try and get the number of files that have the greater length than a particular size. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's say that we can say, instead of writing this out, okay, instead of just writing this out, I can comment this out, and then I'll just say count of files, bad at names, so count of files greater than 100 kilobytes. We initialize that to 0. If the length is greater than 100 kilobytes, we want to increment this using our increment operator. Okay, and then after the fact, we will say if count of files is not equal to 0, then we can write to the command shell files over 100 kilobytes in the current directory. That should satisfy that. So what we're doing, again, we're utilizing the commandlet because it returns a collection. I can iterate through each, and then I'm going to check if the length of that file is greater than a kilobyte, and I will increment my count. So if I do that, then we'll say it says that 14 files over 100 kilobytes in the current directory. Okay, maybe we should do an else. We could just say else right host no files found over 100 kilobytes. So you may want to write a PowerShell script that does some type of sweep for log files or something like that. And this is kind of a way to get started. It's a way to get started. Okay, so that is the for each loop, and I hope that you've gained a little bit more knowledge in just how the PowerShell scripting world works in terms of looping. The next loop we're going to go into is the while loop, and then that'll be it with our pre-test loops, and then after that we'll go into our post-test, which is the do while or do until. See you then.